Speaking on the topic of automated and continuous visible security architectures of the future, we have Sharda Tickoo, who is the technical head for Trend Micro. She heads the technology function for Trend Micro India. She has over 15 years of experience in cybersecurity domain. In her current role, she consults organizations to identify and highlight cybersecurity gaps in their environment and advises best possible ways to plug them. Can we have you on stage, Ms. Tickoo? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Let's see what is it that I want to talk about today, right? So a long time ago, when I was happy, and that is when I did not have a career in cybersecurity, I wanted to take flying lessons. Of course, that did not happen. But one thing, I read a lot about it. So what happens is that when they teach you flying lessons, they tell you something about false horizon also, right? So if it is a dark, starry night and the terrain is low, you can feel that this is the horizon, right? Your horizon is right there. But what actually happens is that that's just an apparent horizon. The actual horizon is over there. Unfortunately, what happens is because of this false horizon concept, there are a lot of accidents that happen, right? Because what you believe is the real horizon is not the actual horizon, it is something else, right? So correlating it to our cybersecurity domain, right? What happened is that we also believed that, a long time, till a long time we thought that it is the best way to attack today's cybersecurity, today's threats, is to stop bad people. And that's where you saw a lot of technologies like anti-malware, blacklisting, content filtering, all the vendors, moving these technologies and trying to build, expertise in that, right? It worked for a while, and then we thought that, there are too many bad people to block. Why don't we do one thing? Why don't we allow good people? And that's where, things like application control, whitelisting, encryption, all of this came into the pictures like, yes, sure, let's allow good people and try to see that how we can contain today's threat, right? What happened is that certainly later on we still figured out, that there might still be a little bit of gray that we need to deal with, something which is not black, not white, but it is gray. And, so that is something, that's all. So that's what we thought is our horizon. And I think you all will agree to me, as it turns out, it was a false horizon, right? Clearly, dealing with the black is not working, and here is why, right? You see that over those 1,000 vulnerabilities that were discovered in 2017, 118 were 0 days. So clearly, your blocking approach is not going to address these 0 days. Ransomware, like Mr. Balsingh just mentioned, ransomware definitely is on decline this year as compared to the previous year, but there are certain new families of ransomwares that are emerging, right? And then things like ransomware as a service, which is picking up. So clearly, dealing with black is also not working, right? Well, the whitelisting thing, the dealing with white, that also seems to be having some concerns, right? Whereas you whitelist good apps, but there are things like, the privilege escalation, the credential theft that happens, which could lead to compromising these genuinely good apps, like we see the Swift attacks that have happened, right? So the whitelisting approach is also somehow which doesn't seem to be working, right? And then when we talk about gray, and that little bit of gray is not that little, right? And that is where this is very concerning, right? If you see that what is the mean time to discover an attack in today's time, it is 99 days. So for some of you who follow these statistics, last year I think it was around 150, or I think it was 150 days before the targeted attacks are detected. Of course, we have improved, but then 99 days, I don't think it is still a good enough statistics, right? There's a lot of scope for our industry in general to beef up our game. And what's more interesting is that 53% of attacks were discovered externally, which means that you get up in the morning, you read the newspaper, and you suddenly figure out, hey, you've been breached, and someone has just posted it on social media or on your Twitter page that, hey, I have all your data, right? So that little bit of gray is also something that doesn't seem to be working anymore, right? Now, and then there are a lot of, so that is the, that's the threat side of it. And on the technology side also, there are a lot of changes happening. So there is a lot of chaos, right? We talk about hybrid data center. So hybrid data center is here, right? Depending on what function you are and how you are in this particular journey of moving to the cloud, you can either be having physical servers or virtual servers or public or private cloud, depending on what suits your organization. But for sure, all the organizations are somewhere in this particular curve, right? And then you're talking about containers, we're talking about Dockers, we're talking about serverless environment. So that makes the game more interesting. So if I take an example of containers, so essentially till now you were just dealing with virtual machines on a hypervisor. Now we are talking about containers, which is essentially a self-contained unit which has its own compute, own resources, own functions, own operating system, and it just does not need to rely on the monolithic application architecture, right? So it is pretty self-contained, and that's what helps businesses go to market very easily and gets you that agility, right? So containers are here, and these are some interesting statistics that if you feel that container security or containers is not something that you would be adopting, but we are seeing globally, there are organizations that have started adopting containers, right? Again, adoption is one thing, and then how do you think about security when you talk about containers, right? I mean, how do I know what happens if my entire container gets hacked, right? Or how do I patch these applications inside the containers, right? So these are certain small things which are bothering us, and while the go-to-market time is getting reduced. Talking about containers and serverless and Dockers, there is another thing that is happening, right, which is DevOps. So DevOps is here, and it is real, it's happening, right? And it is working like a well-oiled machine. It's like a factory. So development creates something, and then there is a ops team that kind of operates that, right? So what has happened traditionally till now is that there is some bit of security which has been put in place in some form or the other, right? So in the development side, people used to do a source code analysis or used to do a secure code review. And then, of course, on the ops side, you had your traditional stuff that was happening, right? And that is what created this DevSecOps. But today's reality is that in every stage of this DevOps, you need to build in the security, whether it is a build, code, plan, release. The security needs to be the integral part of the entire life cycle. And then you need to figure out what element of security will be essential at which phase. For example, at the build phase, what is it that you should be deploying at the code phase? How will the security fit into each of these phases is something that is really important and needs to be considered, right? When IT meets OT, right? I think a lot has been discussed about it. So IT and OT, these two environments which were working in silos till now have suddenly started working together. They are working together, right? Again, from a security standpoint, what used to work in isolation is now working in interconnection. How do you ensure that the security thing is taken care of in this whole IIoT environment, right? And why it becomes more important is that because the entire world is changed, right? So if you talk about an isolation, it's not that the OT environments have not been compromised before, but the nature of compromise was, say, for example, if you talk about Stuxnet or the attack that happened in Middle East, it was literally someone plugging in the USB drive into the OT environment, right? Yeah, so it was essentially you had to visit these physical facilities and try to plug in a USB and then figure out how to do an attack. But now what has happened is that the world has become interconnected, right? And hence the attack pattern on these OT environments has also changed, and that's where you see that you can attack OT platforms using your phishing emails or the ATM attack that happened in Taiwan, right? So the isolation and interconnection, this is something that has changed, and hence securing IIoT becomes very important, right? So this is what is expected of us, right? We are running very fast, and what is expected is that we should be able to change the tires of a moving car. That is what the expectation is, right? And I'm sure you all will agree with me that when businesses want to go agile, they want to move very fast, and they would want us to just be as fast and as agile as possible. So are we ready and equipped to do this, right? So what is it that Trend Micro, and what's it that the strategy that can be adopted, right? So it is essentially the continuous monitoring of your security, of your assets, of your environment, and adapting the security continuously. So it's actually it's a yin and a yang, right? So at one given point you block and prevent, and at other given point in time you should detect and respond, right? As easy, as simple as it may sound, of course, it's not as simple, right? Hence, essentially, this is what is the blueprint, if I would just say, right? So you have prevent. So of course, you try to prevent certain threats by deploying the technologies, prevention technologies, which are hardening the system, isolating everything. If you cannot prevent, you must detect and respond. So if you cannot prevent, you must detect and respond, and then you must predict, which is by running analytics to figure out what could be the next attack pattern that is happening in my organization, right? So if you see, I'm not sure if that is visible here, all these loops are interconnected, which means that detect cannot happen without prevent and respond, or respond cannot happen without predict and prevent. So this all continuous assessment and monitoring has to be happening rapidly, right? When we talk, when I talk to some enterprises and when we talk about prevention, and they say, prevention is not happening is futile, right? I'm anyway going to get breached, so prevention technologies are not happening. My data centers, my hybrid cloud data center, prevention is not working. I got breached. And when I ask them, okay, so what is it that I use to protect your server assets in the data center? They said antivirus, right? So my take is that prevention isn't futile. It's just getting harder, okay? Which means that you will have to put certain additional layers of modules in the prevention stack itself. So it cannot just be a plain antivirus. It has to be vulnerability shielding, exploit prevention, your integrity monitoring, network segmentation if you're using software-defined networks. So the prevention technology also has to be built in a defense in depth kind of an environment, right? Also, like I said, if you cannot prevent, you must detect and respond. So what essentially is the detection and response all about, right? And that comes to a very, maybe critical question. Is the industry underspending on detection and response? Statistics say that, in general, we are spending 70% on prevention only, right? That leads to that just remains 30% on detection and response. So is the industry underspending? I think it's a question that we need to ask to ourselves, right? So what essentially does an response and detection comprise of, right? So it is breach detection, EDR, endpoint detection and response, MDR, managed detection and response, and SOAR, which is your security orchestration, analytics, and response. Most of the conversations that I'm having with the enterprises, the first three are something that are getting detected, that they're getting discussed, more often than not. When we talk about breach detection, right? So how many of you could actually figure out a panda there, right? I think it took you some time, but I think you could have figured out that there's a panda here. So that is essentially what network sandboxing or breach detection is all about. It's a cornerstone of network defense. So if you've got to detect that panda, you need to have a breach detection at the network level. And when I say network, it's not only north-south. It has to be east-west and the lateral movement detection that has to happen, right? So that's about breach detection. Let's talk about EDR in a very brief way. What is essentially an EDR? So EDR is an endpoint detection and response mechanism, an agent sitting on your asset, on your endpoint, and recording all the activity. So should a compromise happen? What is the extent of compromise that is happening in your landscape? You need to run things like threat hunting, threat sweeping, IOC sweeping, investigation, root cause analysis. That is something that is what EDR is all about, the endpoint detection and response, right? There's an interesting thing that is happening that with traditional EPP vendors, endpoint protection platform vendors, there's a certain amount of modules which are getting overlapped with EDR, right? And these are essentially modules which deal with behavior monitoring, machine learning, and all of that. There is an overlap, which means that there are some EDR capabilities which EPP vendors are trying to get on board and make important. As EDR is good, like I said, it is needed, it is a need of an hour, but we also need to understand that what are the challenges and what is it that it needs additionally. EDR is good, but sometimes it may be very expensive. It requires a well-trained staff, threat researchers, so skill set shortage is something which can dissuade you from onboarding into an EDR, because once you deploy an EDR solution which is throwing you so many alerts, is there someone in an organization who can do a meaningful judgment out of these alerts? And sometimes it can turn out to be very complicated, right? So, with this whole background, right? So, you have advanced threat, there are lack of skills, security skills, it's complex, and the gray alert fatigue, not to mention too many logs, too much data getting generated by these modules. So that's where the industry has now come to have something called as MDR, which is Managed Detection and Response, wherein we are trying to figure out that, hey, why don't you offload this whole business to someone else who can man it around the clock and do this managed detection and response for you, right? Which can essentially be done by a certified security provider who has skill set, who does not have skill set shortage, and can give you this meaningful insight and complement the technologies that you have deployed here. And essentially, when we talk about MDR, I just want to say it is not only the endpoints. It should be your endpoints, it should be your servers, it should be your IoT environments, it should be your data center. Everything should actually join in to provide you that MDR space. So to conclude it all, when we talk about these 4 things, which is detection, investigate, respond, and predict, the 4 circles which we just saw, the last thing that I would want to say is that it has to be backed by very strong technical modules. So there cannot be just one single technology that you can rely on to provide you these 4 things. So there has to be a traditional mix of traditional technologies like content filtering, then there has to be a modern day technology like behavior monitoring, machine learning. All these have to complement and be part of this detection, investigate, response, and predict to give you the, the real security architecture which can last long, right? So hopefully, if we follow this, we may be able to do this, right? I think with this, I'll end my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be right outside. Thank you for your time.